being one with nature, being one with the universe. Old gibberish. If anything, the bond between humans and the outside has always been held together by a sort of tension. Civilization, after all, first emerged in the safety of caves and other hollow interiors shared with others. They saw the great outdoors as another wild and indifferent interior, bustling with its own sovereigns. Humanity and nature were strangers to each other, sharing a freedom that fundamentally separates them.
How is a bubble born? Like this. A force, usually air, bends a viscous fluid from the opposite direction, stretching it into a thin membrane. To retain the minimum surface tension possible and keep itself intact, the membrane wraps around the force and curves into a sphere containing it. Two forces keep the bubble from bursting. First, its surface tension, stretched to the maximum. Second, the difference of pressures between the pressure inside and outside the bubble. A bubble is a convergence zone of conflicting flows, a typhoon in miniature reduced to its basic parts.
You weren't listening.
I was. So, what does this have to do with the number?
It has everything to do with the number. Am I being too abstract?
Well, abstraction has its comforts.
True. Can I continue? Among Tagalog-speaking Filipinos, there is a concept that they call utang na loob, literally meaning debt of the inside. A loose translation of it into English is debt of gratitude or goodwill. Utang na loob, like gratitude, bears the weight of intimacy, a shared interior. Utang na loob is simultaneously secreted and absorbed through porous membranes at the point of contact, an entanglement of two distinct insides. This is intimacy, when the container itself is contained.
Loob, the inside. You float there, words flowing from your mouth, a bubble, just released from the slime of all things that are possible. I imagine you pop out, without reason, from that sticky vat of shapeless and directionless potentials. And suddenly, you are there. Finally, form. Fragile, yes, but now defined. Unhitched from chaos, now there, floating under the sun and dancing through the outside, along with the other bubbles, entangled in the froth of time. And suddenly, you're wrapping yourself around me as I wrap myself around you, and for this, I owe you. Until either of us lands on a rock or a leaf, or bursts on the finger of a careless hand.
Thus, the loob or the inside is the hallowed interior space where being finds itself wrapped in multiple membranes of intimacy. Its indebtedness, which is to say, any intimate gesture, is either a leakage or a point of entry, a hole. The loob may assimilate a piece of the outside or burst within another bigger bubble, depending on the viscosity and permeability of its constitutive membrane and the amount of pressure it is subjected to.
If that is so, What is the subjective force that creates the bubble you're talking about?
Who knows? Spirit? Will? Or maybe something as boring as a specific combination of amino acids. That is a question about the nature of life itself. But isn't life just another genre of non-life? Of the inorganic? Indeed, for the Brahmanas of the Vedic religions, life is not a gift, but rather a loan. Only when she sacrifices does she redeem herself from death. You see, death, guilt, and sin share the same linguistic origins in many Indo-European languages, such as in the Germanic Schuld, or the Sanskrit cognate rna, whose meanings even include crime. No trace of such moral economics can be seen in the Austronesian utang. Its meanings range from loan in Tagalog, merit as in the Tiboli utong, and gift or ahutang-hutang, hinting at its roots in earlier merit-based systems of debt circulation. Semantic and cultural drifts over time saw Indo-European continental guilt mooring to the tongues of the Malayan archipelagos. Thus, it was necessary for kutang to expand topologically and be given interior and exterior dimensions, not an actual space, but a proxemic diagram. Thus, the loob, the inner intimate space, and the labas, the outside, a move which rescues credit's original unblemished function.
And what is this function?
Two things. First, between people. Primitive communal exchange circulates through folds of overlapping interiors between intimates. Barter was reserved only for outsiders. Thus, credit was a magnetic energy generated from the piston-like motions between the inside and the outside. In short, credit was a potentially powerful creative force. Second, between people and the outside, or the non-intimate. Humanity was perpetually committed to spiritual debt sacrifice, seeping through multitudes of cosmic remittance vectors and directed towards nature's spirits and deceased ancestors, with which they have always had a sticky bond. What we call culture is the sum of all cosmic credit activity. The outside and its inhabitants were largely seen as communal resource. Inside versus outside tension was the driving dialectic of primitive war. The victims of this conflict, some unfortunate outsiders, naturally became the slaves, who were then metabolized into the first power-generating assets. The need for efficiency demanded diverting these energies into monism and eventually monotheism. The emergent numerical class's first offense was turning all solid into air, perforating all membranes and blocking the inside-outside dynamism. For this, they innovated on the wasteful process of perpetual sacrifice through the gradual diversion of all debt payment to an omnipotent, omniscient, and crucially, omnipresent deity. This is illustrated by the story of a pre-existential Edenic oneness, a time when insides and outsides did not exist. Ultimately, Abrahamic monotheism and similar variants conceived a spiteful God that contains all of humanity's cosmic indebtedness in a single absolute vessel, himself, the one which contains all. All these were catalyzed by the transition from pan-directional intimacies and trust-based notions of indebtedness to the birth of coinage, an autonomous, and self-propagating fetish segment whose value depends entirely on supreme and inherently violent domination.
Go on.
But it is fair to say that no one would have imagined the genius of Christianity. Emerging from years of imperial captivity, the loving God of this even more efficient model casted the maximum level of indebtedness on earth through its clever twist. This time, only one sacrifice is required of humanity, and the only way to pay one's debts is through the ultimate sacrifice, the death of God Himself. By charging His only Son as tribute, the most expensive price, the Christian God implicated humanity in a transaction that did not exist prior to the definition of the terms of payment. It created a kind of debt that can only be paid, not by slaughtering chickens or even doing good works, but by uncompromising belief on this very relation, and by extension, a yearning for the renewal of balance under God's brokerage. The project continues, but the entire planet, the entire Gaian bubble itself, is now indebted to God, who has become the one God from which all numbers serially surge.
The end goal?
A balance of accounts free of liabilities, paradise, oneness, and only those who truly believe in the number shall receive it.
I didn't know you were such a believer.
Well, at first it was about God. Then eventually, it was anything that maintained the God-soul dyad. Clearly, neither God nor the soul is important in this relation. The one, after all, is bedfellows with its greatest enemy, zero. Nothing. As such, they are opposites, and as such, they are fundamentally codependent. The retreat of divinity, inaugurated by modernity, saw a procession of secular surrogates and devices whose jobs are to keep the God-soul relation afloat. Hollow philosophies and concepts, raised forests turned into plantations, emptied out barrels of guns, void political speeches, excavated mountains, vacant condominiums, meaningless sex, unfulfilling work, depleted souls. All nothings claiming to be something. Emptiness is a prerequisite for this bond's buoyancy. All sorts of surrogates, the landlord, the monarch, the techno-capitalist, all preaching about limitless expansion of the human, jumping up and down every time any threshold is breached. Credit loses all its generative force and is reduced into a death-inducing clot.
What then is the function of the number?
The number exacerbates the effects of credit blockage by dividing the unmeasurable into segments. But it is simply a unit of measurement, like an hour or an inch, in themselves impossible to touch, see, or smell, and can only be measured. A good chunk of intelligence production after Plato had the aim of segmenting and diffusing the one, the world itself, without reaching the 0 point, a fact clearly seen in decimal mathematics. This renders the God-soul relationship infinitely measurable, a feat that coinage emulated in its segmentation of modern social relations. What really mattered, the only thing that mattered, is that it can be measured. Because by being measured, it matters. It is matter par excellence. Matter. This is what the number flattens the world into, acting as brokers between subject and object. All credit flows, coalescing into secular finance. The number springs into a life of its own. Speculation is its breathing mechanism, huffing and puffing as the world holds its breath, inhaling all the mind, muscle, and the earth's burnable fuels. It exhales paranoia. This is the atmosphere in the modern shared interior, the smog of mistrust that dulls the edges between things, where counting and measuring are the only ways to know how far we are from falling into the edge. To question the measuring amounts to either heresy or revolt. Here's a story of numbers.
400 years.
Years of imperial slavery in these god-forsaken islands.
7,487.
Filipino babies born every day, each already carrying
112,000
pesos of debt, obliged to pay the state's
14 trillion pesos.
and growing national debt.
$305 trillion.
Value of global debt.
169 million.
The number of wandering outsiders, indebted and enslaved by the number
106 years.
of armed revolutions by the indebted classes, innumerable insurgent cells, throbbing from the edges of the world, radiating wave by small wave from the outside to the innards of the numerical clot.
Abstraction has its comforts.
The best way to concretize an abstraction is through a better abstraction. There is nothing material about the number, nor the debt through which it propagates. The real trick is that the numerical debt doesn't really have to be paid. As we have established, payment only defines the relation a posteriori, and actually paying the debt in full will vaporize this relation. The first to question the logic of the number were quick to realize the emptiness of its fetish segments. The most tempestuous revolts, for instance, started with the tearing of tax certificates and colonial land claims. Their calls, cancel all debts and redistribute the land.
Paradise?
No. By the cancellation of numerical debt, what happens is not the resolution of the tension. Rather, tension, the pressure differential which keeps the bubble of difference between divinity and humanity from bursting, is restored. All revolutions have the secret aim to revive divinity by rescuing the flow of cosmic debt from all blockages, to reacquaint oneself with the wholly other, to tear down defenses and usher in the totally outside once again.
Si nous ne payons pas, nos bailleurs de fonds ne mourront pas. Soyons-en sûrs. Par contre, si nous payons, c'est nous qui allons mourir. Soyons-en sûrs également.
The outside.
Would you agree? I suspect that the totally outside never exists. All around us are layers and folds of possible shared interiors and potential intimacies yet to wrap into us. The number is bound to burst, we know this, but we can never escape this indebtedness to the world and to others. This sea is proof that all this walking and wandering does end. Finding no use to speak of its inhospitability, the sea contains us by just being there. The interface between this wave and my bare feet, another set of irreconcilable differences. Another bubble, a proof that I still exist. The sea foam recedes and tries to pull me with it before it leaves, slowly dissipating into the sea, into being sea. Should I be grateful that unlike that sea foam bursting like a bubble into oneness, I am still here? Look! Here's something to be really grateful for. A gift that left between my toes. A tiny shell.
See that?
What?
There on the horizon, black clouds. A gigantic storm, it seems.
Sure. Let's get back inside.